Ethan used to believe that stability was the same thing as happiness. At 32, he had everything that looked right from the outside: a steady job, a comfortable apartment, and a wife who loved him with a quiet, unwavering devotion. His life was built on routines: morning coffee with Claire, polite conversations about work, evenings spent scrolling through separate screens on the same couch. It was a peaceful life. Just not a full one. Sometimes, Ethan felt like he was watching himself from a distance, as if he were playing a role in a story written by someone else. He smiled when he was expected to smile, nodded when he was supposed to agree, and said all the right things without ever feeling the weight of truth behind them. He wasn't lying exactly, but he wasn't being honest either. Claire was kind in a way that made guilt sharper. She remembered small details about him: how he took his tea, which songs he liked on long drives, the way he preferred silence over noise when he was tired. She loved him in ways that were gentle and consistent. Yet somewhere along the way, their conversations had become careful and shallow, like two people afraid of stepping into deeper water. "How was your day?" she would ask. "Fine," he would reply, and that was usually where it ended. Ethan told himself this was normal. Every marriage settled into habits, didn't it? Passion softened into companionship. Intensity turned into comfort. But late at night, when Claire was asleep beside him, Ethan would stare at the ceiling and feel an unnamed restlessness pressing against his chest. It wasn't desire for someone else, not yet. It was more like the quiet ache of living a life that didn't quite fit. The only person who ever made that feeling feel less heavy was Liam. They had met in college, years before Ethan married Claire. Back then, Liam had been the kind of person who spoke openly about everything: his fears, his dreams, his identity. He was confident in a way Ethan admired but never learned to imitate. While Ethan was building a version of himself that the world would accept, Liam was busy becoming who he already knew he was. After college, life had pulled them in different directions, but they stayed in touch. A message here, a call there. Over time, those small check-ins became longer conversations, then regular ones. Liam was the person Ethan turned to when work felt unbearable or when he couldn't explain the strange emptiness he carried around. With Liam, Ethan didn't need to pretend. "You ever feel like you're living on autopilot?" Ethan asked during one late-night call. "All the time," Liam replied, then paused. "But I stopped pretending. That meant I was okay with it." That sentence stayed with Ethan longer than it should have. Liam listened in a way that felt rare. He didn't rush to fix things or dismiss Ethan's doubts. He asked questions, real ones. He remembered what Ethan said. He noticed changes in his voice. In those conversations, Ethan felt more seen than he had in years, and that terrified him, because with every call, every message, the space between who he was and who he claimed to be seemed to grow wider. He began waiting for Liam's notifications in a way that felt too eager. He caught himself smiling at his phone, then quickly locking the screen when Claire walked into the room. It wasn't romantic, he told himself. It wasn't inappropriate. They were just friends. Old friends reconnecting. There was no harm in that, but harm didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it entered quietly, disguised as comfort. Claire noticed the changes before Ethan did. The way he was distracted during conversations. The way his attention drifted elsewhere. The way he seemed emotionally present and absent at the same time. "Is something wrong?" she asked one evening as they washed dishes together. Ethan hesitated, his hands frozen under running water. "No. Just tired." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on him, searching for something he couldn't name. The truth was, Ethan didn't know what was wrong either. He only knew that the life he had built felt increasingly fragile, like a carefully arranged structure held together by silence and habit. He had spent so long avoiding the questions inside him that he had forgotten how to answer them. With Liam, those questions were impossible to ignore. With Claire, they felt dangerous to ask, and so Ethan remained suspended between two versions of himself, the man he was expected to be and the one he didn't yet have the courage to face. He told himself he was still in control, that nothing had crossed a line, that everything could stay exactly as it was, but deep down, he sensed it. The truth wasn't waiting in the future. It was already there, quietly unraveling inside him. Ethan told himself that nothing had changed, yet his days were quietly reorganizing around Liam. He checked his phone more often, not out of habit but anticipation. A message from Liam felt different from any other notification, lighter, warmer, like a small window opening in a room that had been closed for too long. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, more personal. What had once been casual updates turned into late-night calls that stretched past midnight. Liam asked questions no one else asked anymore. Not about work or schedules, but about feelings, about what Ethan wanted, what scared him, what he avoided thinking about. "You always talk about what you should do," Liam said one night. "But never about what you actually want." Ethan laughed softly. "I don't think I know the difference anymore." Liam didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Maybe that's the problem." That sentence unsettled Ethan more than he expected. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply honest, and honesty felt dangerous. Because honesty required him to look at parts of himself he had spent years carefully ignoring. With Claire, things felt increasingly distant. Not hostile, not broken, just hollow. Their conversations followed the same predictable patterns. Grocery lists. Weekend plans. Shared responsibilities. They functioned well together, like partners managing a life efficiently. But emotionally, something vital was missing. Ethan noticed how easily he opened up to Liam compared to Claire. With Liam, words came naturally. With Claire, he filtered everything, trimming his thoughts into smaller, safer versions of themselves. The guilt arrived slowly, without drama. It wasn't the kind that screamed. It whispered. It showed up in small moments, when Claire smiled at him and he felt undeserving of it, when he deleted messages he didn't want her to see, when he felt closer to someone else than to the person he had promised himself to. Still, he told himself it wasn't cheating. They hadn't touched. They hadn't said anything explicit. There were no secret meetings, no physical betrayal. Just conversations. Just feelings. Just two people talking. But Ethan knew, even if he refused to admit it, that emotional intimacy carried its own weight. He was sharing parts of himself with Liam that Claire no longer had access to. His fears, his doubts, his quiet longing to be understood. And every time he chose Liam over Claire emotionally, a line shifted inside him. One evening, after a particularly long call, Liam grew unusually quiet. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Ethan hesitated. "Sure. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't tried so hard to fit into it?" The question struck too close. Ethan's throat tightened. "All the time." There was a pause. "Not awkward, heavy." "I care about you," Liam said finally. "More than I probably should." Ethan felt his chest tighten, a mix of fear and something dangerously close to relief. He wanted to respond immediately, to say something honest, something brave. Instead, he chose the familiar path. "Liam, I'm married," he said quietly. "I know," Liam replied. "I'm not asking you to change anything. I just didn't want to keep pretending I felt nothing." Ethan didn't sleep that night. His thoughts circled endlessly around Liam's words. The idea that someone understood him so completely, and wanted him, emotionally, felt intoxicating. At the same time, it felt like a betrayal he hadn't earned the right to commit. The next morning, Claire noticed his silence. "You're really distant lately," she said over breakfast. "Did I do something?" Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who trusted him without hesitation. Who believed in the version of him he had carefully constructed. Who loved him without knowing the full truth. "No," he said. "It's not you." Which was the worst kind of lie. Because it was only half false that he started pulling away without realizing it. Shorter replies, distracted glances, less emotional presence. Claire tried to bridge the distance, but Ethan didn't know how to explain something he barely understood himself, that he was losing his marriage not through anger or conflict, but through absence. With Liam, he felt alive. With Claire, he felt responsible, and responsibility, he was learning, could not compete with the hunger to feel seen. One night, Ethan stood in the living room, phone in his hand, staring at a message from Liam. "I don't want to be the person you hide parts of yourself with." Claire was asleep in the bedroom. The apartment was quiet. Peaceful. Ethan realized then that he wasn't standing at the edge of a mistake, that he was already inside it, not with his body, but with his heart. The confrontation didn't arrive the way Ethan expected. There was no shouting, no accusations, no dramatic discovery. It came quietly, on an ordinary evening, when the weight of everything unspoken finally became too heavy to ignore. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table when he came home, her hands folded around a cold cup of tea. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. "We need to talk," she said. Those 4 words had never sounded so final. Ethan sat across from her, already knowing what was coming. His phone was on the table between them, face down, like evidence he hadn't bothered to hide anymore. "I saw the messages," Claire continued. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "Not all of them. I didn't need to. I just needed to see how you talked to him." Ethan swallowed. "Claire, please don't explain yet," she said softly. "Just tell me one thing first." She hesitated, then asked the question he had been avoiding for months. "Do you still love me?" The room felt unbearably quiet. Ethan searched for the safest answer, the kindest answer, the one that wouldn't destroy what remained of their life. But for the first time, he didn't want to hide behind safety. "I care about you," he said slowly. "But I don't think I've been honest with you. Or with myself." Claire closed her eyes, as if she had already prepared for that response. "I think I've been pretending to be someone I'm not," Ethan continued. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "I built a version of myself that fit the life I thought I was supposed to have. And you fell in love with that version." Tears gathered in Claire's eyes. "Are you saying you never loved me?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "I loved you the only way I knew how. But it wasn't complete. And I didn't know how to admit that without destroying everything." Claire let out a slow breath. "So what about him?" Ethan didn't hesitate this time. "Liam makes me feel like I don't have to pretend. Like I can finally be honest about who I am. And I hate myself for realizing that while being married to you." There it was. The truth. Not dressed up. Not softened, just real. Claire's tears finally fell, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She simply looked at him with a mixture of grief and understanding that hurt more than anger ever could. "I think I've known for a long time," she said. "Not about Liam. But about you. About how something in you was always, elsewhere." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Claire gave a sad smile. "Because I loved the version of you that tried. And I kept hoping one day you'd feel at home in it." Silence filled the space between them again, but it was different now. Heavier, yet clearer. They talked for hours. About the beginning of their relationship. About the moments that felt forced. About the parts of themselves they had both ignored in order to keep things stable. There was pain in every sentence, but also a strange relief, like finally removing a mask that had become too tight to wear. "I don't hate you," Claire said eventually. "But I can't stay in a marriage built on half-truths." Ethan nodded. "I don't want to keep lying just to avoid losing something that's already slipping away." They didn't decide everything that night. There were no neat resolutions, no perfect conclusions. Just an agreement to stop pretending. To separate without bitterness. To let each other go without turning the truth into a weapon. When Ethan finally met Liam again, it wasn't with celebration or excitement. It was with quiet honesty. "I'm not free yet," Ethan told him. "Not emotionally. Not fully. I don't want to replace one lie with another." Liam smiled gently. "I don't want to be your escape. I want to be your choice." That distinction stayed with Ethan. For the first time in his life, he wasn't choosing comfort. He wasn't choosing safety. He was choosing uncertainty, with awareness instead of denial. That he didn't know what would happen with Liam. He didn't know what his future would look like without the structure he had built around himself. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity: infidelity hadn't destroyed his marriage. Fear had. Fear of being honest. Fear of being seen. Fear of admitting that the life he was living wasn't the life he needed, and as painful as the unraveling was, it also felt like the beginning of something real, not a perfect ending, but an honest one. The weeks after the separation felt unreal to Ethan, as if he were moving through a life that no longer fully belonged to him. The apartment he once shared with Claire now felt too quiet, every familiar object carrying a memory that refused to fade. The couch where they used to sit in comfortable silence. The kitchen where they argued over small things that now seemed insignificant. Even the walls felt different, stripped of the certainty that had once held everything in place. Claire moved out first. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. They agreed it was easier that way, less painful than pretending nothing had changed. Their final goodbye was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it harder. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Claire said, standing at the door with her suitcase. Ethan nodded, his voice barely steady. "I hope you do too." They didn't hug. They didn't cry in front of each other. Some endings were too complicated for dramatic gestures. After that, Ethan was left alone with himself for the first time in years. Without a role to perform, without expectations to meet, he didn't know who he was supposed to be. The freedom he had once longed for felt heavy, like a responsibility he hadn't learned how to carry yet. Liam tried not to overwhelm him. He didn't push for answers or promises. He gave Ethan space, even when it was difficult. "How are you really?" Liam asked during one of their quiet walks through the city. Ethan thought about it before answering. "I feel like I just woke up from a long dream. And now I have to learn how to live while I'm awake." Liam smiled slightly. That's not the worst place to start. They spent time together in simple ways: coffee, long conversations, shared silences. There was no urgency, no rush toward defining anything. Ethan appreciated that. For once, he wasn't being pulled into a new version of himself. He was being allowed to discover one. Yet guilt still followed him like a shadow. Not just guilt about Claire, but about the years he had spent hiding from himself. About the life he had built out of fear instead of truth. Some nights, he wondered if he had simply traded one kind of dishonesty for another, leaving behind a marriage only to step into uncertainty without knowing what he truly wanted. "What if I'm just running again?" Ethan asked Liam one evening. Liam stopped walking and turned to him. "Running from what?" "From responsibility. From the damage I caused. From the idea that I might hurt people no matter what I choose." Liam considered his words carefully. "Running is when you avoid the truth. What you're doing now is facing it. That's different." Ethan wasn't sure if he believed that yet, but he wanted to. He began reconnecting with parts of himself he had ignored for years. He read more. Wrote in a journal he had abandoned long ago. Reflected on moments from his past that suddenly made sense in ways they never had before. It felt like piecing together a version of himself that had always existed beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. Claire remained present in his life, but differently. They spoke occasionally, with honesty replacing expectation. There was still sadness between them, but also respect. "I'm not angry anymore," Claire admitted during one of their last conversations. "Just sad for the time we both lost." "So am I," Ethan replied. "But I don't regret telling the truth. I regret not telling it sooner." That became his quiet rule moving forward: no more half-truths. No more pretending comfort was the same as happiness. No more building a life that looked right instead of one that felt real. With Liam, nothing was officially defined. They were close, but careful. Honest, but patient. Ethan wanted to make sure he wasn't replacing one emotional dependency with another. He wanted to choose Liam freely, not as an escape from guilt or confusion. One evening, sitting on Liam's balcony as the city lights flickered below them, Ethan finally spoke the thought he had been holding back. "I don't know exactly what I'm ready for," he said. "But I know I don't want to hide anymore. Not from you. Not from myself." Liam met his gaze. "That's enough for now." And for the first time, it truly was. Ethan didn't see his future clearly. There were still questions without answers, still wounds that hadn't fully healed. But there was also something new, something fragile and unfamiliar: clarity, not about love, Not about relationships, but about himself. He had spent most of his life performing a role designed by fear. Now, he was learning how to exist without a script, and even though the uncertainty terrified him, it felt more honest than anything he had ever known.